Okey-dokey. So my name's Amy Byrd. I'm coming here from the University of Pittsburgh, and I'm going to be presenting some preliminary analyses looking at the interaction between genetic variation in MAOA, early childhood maltreatment, and its prediction of later personality pathology. So as I'm sure we're all aware, early maltreatment is a risk factor for a wide range of psychopathology later in life. And I'm going to be focusing specifically here on the well-documented association between early maltreatment and later antisocial behavior. So early maltreatment is thought to disrupt social and emotional development. It's been associated with emotion and anger dysregulation, and it has a significant impact on the development of neural circuitry underlying those regions implicated in emotion processing and emotion regulation. And these things together are thought to increase risk for later antisocial behavior. At the same time, we know that not all youth who engage in or who experience early maltreatment will go on to engage in later antisocial behavior. And this has raised questions about potential moderators. So what other factors may those youth who are experiencing early maltreatment put them at greater risk for later antisocial behavior? And one potential moderator that's received a good bit of attention in the past 15 years is monoamine oxidase A, or MAOA. MAOA is a sex-linked gene that's located on the X chromosome. This is particularly important for what I'll be talking about today. So this means that males have one copy and females have two copies. And variation in the promoter region of this gene confers high versus low production of this enzyme. MAOA, like early maltreatment, has been shown to play a significant role in the development of the corticolimbic brain circuitry, and it's also been associated with emotion and anger dysregulation as well as aggression. So the idea being that those youth who are experiencing early maltreatment and have certain variation in MAOA may have a sort of a double whammy and may place them at greater risk for later engagement in antisocial behavior. So in the seminal study conducted by Caspi and colleagues in 2002, they looked at this gene by environment interaction in a large sample of Caucasian males. They defined maltreatment by those variables that you see here and looked at antisocial behavior across development. And this graph depicts here on the x-axis greater levels of childhood maltreatment, on the y-axis variation in antisocial behavior, and you can see shown by the dark black line here that those individuals with the low activity MAOA variant who were experiencing the greatest levels of maltreatment were then going on to engage in the greatest levels of antisocial behavior later in life. So this gene by environment interaction has been replicated across numerous studies since then, and we recently conducted a meta-analysis on those studies. So in 20 male studies totaling over 10,000 participants, we found that indeed those individuals with the low activity allele who were experiencing maltreatment were at greatest risk for later antisocial behavior. And when maltreatment was defined in a way that was very consistent with Caspi and his original study, this effect was even more significant. These effects survived a variety of different sensitivity analyses, and I say all this to say that we really believe there is something going on here and something that we want to better understand. And importantly, what I'm going to be focusing on today is that there has been a number of studies more recently that have tried to replicate this in female samples. And interestingly, the high-risk allele is the opposite of that in males, and we think that's because, again, this is a sex-linked gene, and it may be operating very differently in males that have one copy versus females that have two copies. So in the current study, we sought to replicate this gene by environment interaction, focusing specifically on females, and we wanted to ask a different question, and specifically what is mediating this association? So what's going on that's actually putting those youth at more risk for later engagement in antisocial behavior? And second, extend it a bit and make it more relevant to many of you in the audience, and look at whether or not this is specific to antisocial personality disorder and or may also increase risk for borderline personality features. So we did this in the Pittsburgh Girls Study, which is an ongoing study I know that you've heard a lot about, totaling almost 2,500 participants, the majority of which are African American. It's an at-risk sample. And importantly, the girls and their families were assessed annually across the lifespan. So it gives us a really good opportunity to look at these questions longitudinally over time. So this is just a depiction of the data collection across the 4 samples. So we looked at early maltreatment from or under the ages of 12. Again, as consistent as we could be with CASB's original definition, looking at separation from a caregiver, low warmth, harsh discipline, experience of sexual abuse, as well as exposure to violence. We then modeled, and I'm really sorry about my letters that cannot seem to stay on the same line here. I swear they didn't look like this in my presentation. We modeled anger dysregulation across adolescence, so we wanted to look specifically at whether increases in anger dysregulation were mediating potential associations with later personality disorders, focusing on ASPD symptom severity and BPD symptom severity as defined by the ASRI. So how do we look at the data? We first look at early maltreatment, predicting, again, increases in anger dysregulation during adolescence, and we use multi-level modeling to compare the strength of this association between those individuals with high activity MAOA and those individuals with low activity MAOA. And we, again, expect, based on the limited research that's been done, that in females, those experiencing maltreatment and possessing the high-activity MAOA variant will be at greatest risk for increases in anger dysregulation. We then asked whether or not this association was mediating the association that's been shown in the literature in predicting later ASPD symptoms, and also asked whether this could be is specific to APSD or also might be increasing risk for BPD symptoms. And again, expect that those with the high activity MAOA will be at greatest risk in the presence of early maltreatment. So our total sample was about 85% of the original sample that we were able to get genetic information on. The majority was African American and about a quarter experienced maltreatment. The proportion of African Americans as well as the proportion of those who experienced maltreatment was equivalent across high activity and low activity MAOA. And so looking first at whether or not the strength of this association was different in those with high activity MAOA and low activity MAOA, we found significant associations between early maltreatment and increases in anger dysregulation across adolescence. And this was in fact stronger for those with high activity MAOA. So those girls that were experiencing early maltreatment and possessed the high activity MAOA variant were at greatest risk for increases in anger dysregulation across adolescence. We then asked whether or not this was mediating the association with adult outcomes. Again, found significant associations between early maltreatment and increases in anger dysregulation that then went on to predict increased APSD symptoms in adulthood. And this direct path between early maltreatment and ASPD was no longer significant. There was a significant indirect path suggesting that any association between early maltreatment and later antisocial personality symptoms was in fact being mediated through anger dysregulation, and that this was strongest for those girls who also had the high activity MAOA allele. We found a similar pattern for when looking at BPD symptom severity in adulthood. Again, significant associations between early maltreatment and increases in anger dysregulation that then increased risk for BPD symptoms in adulthood. No significant direct effect and a significant indirect effect. And again, this was most significant in those with high activity MAOA. And I also want to point out that the path that was significantly different is that between early maltreatment and anger dysregulation. So MAOA is significantly varying the association here versus the association seen between anger dysregulation and the outcome. So those with early maltreatment and high activity MAOA are at greater risk for higher levels of anger dysregulation in adolescence, and that in turn then places them at greater risk for these personality outcomes in adulthood. So just to summarize, we did replicate the interaction between MAOA and early maltreatment, and indeed, consistent with the limited research in the area, this is the high activity MAOA plus maltreatment that confers increased risk. We saw that it was increased risk for increasing levels of anger dysregulation in adolescence that then in turn put individuals at increased risk for not only antisocial behavior, but also borderline personality features in adulthood. So I think in regard to future directions and limitations of the current study, this area of research is still really limited. Again, the majority of work in this area has been done in males and needs to continue to be looked at in females, especially since we are seeing such differences between males and females. We only looked at one potential mediator here and focused on anger dysregulation. It may be that it's broader emotion dysregulation in general, or that there may be different types of emotions and emotional development that is different across disorders and can help us to better understand specificity of outcome. So what is it? We know that increased anger dysregulation is putting these girls at risk for later personality pathology, and what is it that's kind of directing them on those different paths? And then lastly, I think with all genetics research, just trying to avoid any kind of deterministic predictions. This is one, very early, and two, I think we're pretty far from genotyping anyone and being able to say anything specific about what path or trajectory that they are going to continue on. And at the same time, I think it's important in helping us to better understand mechanisms that may be underlying these associations. And lastly, thanks to all these people who certainly helped to conduct this work and make this possible, the PGS participants and their families, without whom none of this would be possible. And thank you guys for listening. Okay, and apparently I have time for a question. Yes? Thank you. Yeah, certainly, and we definitely could look at alternative outcomes to see whether or not it is specific to, the question was whether or not it's an externalizing outcome that we're picking up on. And we have the data to look at that as well. That's a really good point. We can certainly do that. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.